This review could be really short because this lens is just spectacular. So if you're in a rush, here's your review. The lens is spectacular. If you were on the fence on buying it, go buy it because you won't regret for a second. Now, for all the others that are interested in the longer version of this video, I wanted to start with thanking RCE Photo, the biggest used photography market in Italy, with also some shops around Europe, because thanks to them, I was able to use the Nikon 180-600 for a couple of weeks. And the results that I got together with the Z6III, my brother's Z6III, were jaw-dropping. Now, luck, of course, played a role, because the fact that I was able to photograph the golden eagle, I was able to photograph the osprey, both birds that I've been willing to photograph for a while and didn't have the luck, again, to find them and photographing them, definitely play a role in me being excited about it. But aside from that, the lens performed really good. This lens is built really well. It's solid with tight tolerances and it's black, which if you follow this channel, you know I don't really like white lenses like the one that I have in the back, which is the Fuji 150-600. And from a size perspective, they're pretty much the same, although we'll see that the Nikon lens is a little bit thicker, but we're gonna get to that in a second. When it comes to controls, you get another focus mode focus switch, you get a focus range limiter with only two positioning, only distant or the full range. You get the function ring and you get the function button on the side. Nothing super fancy, pretty typical Nikon stuff. At the end of the day, it's all you need. You don't need anything more than that. The lens is internal zooming and it's weather sealed, like you would come to expect for this type of lens, especially from first-party manufacturers. And it comes with the tripod collar. Now, the tripod collar comes, of course, with a tripod foot, and that foot isn't Arca Swiss compatible, which sucks. You know that I praise Fuji for getting us already an Arca Swiss compatible one, because I have everything that is Arca Swiss, so even if I forget the tripod mount, I would still be able to use it. With this one, you just have to purchase or use one of your plates, because otherwise you will not be able to use it on your tripod. The lens comes with a typical lens hood, nothing fancy, nothing to write home about, and the front filter is 95 millimeters, which is pretty typical. I mean, the Sony 200-600 is basically the same thing. The Fuji, on the other hand, that you see there is 82 millimeters, but also that is f8 at 600. This lens is 6.3, so there's a difference in there. The one thing that surprised me is how well it handles with a small camera such as the Z6 Mark III. However, the lens weighs more than 2 kilos, and despite being very similar to this Sony equivalent, the 200-600, I felt like the lens handles a lot better with a small body. It's like the balance, the internal balance of the lens is more towards the camera than the front, and so it makes it easier to handle, even handheld, without feeling the weight on your arms. Again, this is what I remember from using the 200-600. By the way, you're going to see the review over here. In general, however, I felt that it was pretty easy to handle, even with a small camera. the image quality on this lens is simply spectacular. These are lenses that you basically use usually zoomed in to 600 and wide open, because you need to get as much light as possible, and also you want to blur the background if there is a chance. And in this type of scenario, the lens performs spectacularly well. Now, of course, the fact that I used it on a low megapixel body like the Z6 Mark III probably helps. I didn't stress the sharpness too much with that. But even zooming in on the Z6III files, the sharpness was plenty enough to go pretty deep into cropping, and the results remain top-notch. I couldn't spot any visible fringing, which is good, and let alone flare. I mean, flare, you don't see that much flare on lenses like this because, first of all, you don't get the sun in the frame 99.999% of the time, and even if the sun is not in the frame, you usually tend to use the sun at your back because you want your subject to be lit. So realistically, I wouldn't be concerned about flare at all. The bokeh is nice. However, it may be a little bit busy when there's foliage in the background, but honestly, all the lenses like this seems to have the same type of behavior, and realistically, that's what you probably should expect. But in general, I think the bokeh is pretty smooth. Colors are rich, and the stabilizer work perfectly. I could really lower, especially when I was shooting deers, which are not moving as fast as birds in flight. I could really lower my shutter speed to help lower the ISO, even if they were almost in the dark. And the results that I got were really good. From an autofocusing perspective, I couldn't complain at all. Like, it was very reliable with only a minor amount of missed shot, even in long sequences like the one that you're seeing right now. And yes, the cormorant pooped while I was shooting it. I didn't really miss. I only missed a few shots, but the vast majority of shots were spot on, perfectly focused, and really nothing that I could complain about when it comes to the overall image quality with pictures. Even in video, as you've seen in this video intro, the lens works beautifully. For the most part, it stays locked on the subject and doesn't lose it. Although I experienced some occasional focus drifting where you wouldn't expect it to do, because the subject was clear and yet the focus was drifting either on the back or on the front. However, I must warn you that I am not a Nikon shooter, so it may be user fault. I was a Nikon shooter back in the D700 days, talking about what, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I don't remember. But I'm not a Nikon shooter anymore, and definitely I'm not a Nikon shooter when it comes to the Z system, so it may be a user error. And in general, even if it wasn't a user error, but it was an actual issue with the autofocus, you wouldn't blame it on the lens, you would blame it on the camera. But again, for the most part, you get amazing video results and amazing video autofocus. The 4K 120 that I was shooting was spectacularly beautiful, and for the most part, even when subjects were hiding behind trees or were going behind something, you would still track them pretty easily. Speaking of user errors, I couldn't find the groove with the stabilization in video. And I'm pretty sure it's a user error because every review online says that the stabilization in Nikon in general, especially with telephoto lenses, is spectacular. So it may have been me and the way I handled the camera. I'm sure with time I would get much more comfortable and would get better results. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not that it wasn't working at all. It was working pretty fine for the most part, but sometimes it would jump a little bit more than I expected to. Again, it may be that those videos may have drifted my expectation towards something that is not realistic, or it may be my mistake. But aside from that, really for video, you cannot go wrong with the Z6III and the 180-600. This setup allowed me to capture footage that I cherish of subjects that I was hoping to photograph and take video of for a long time. So really, I'm not complaining about anything because, again, I found the experience of shooting with this setup pretty spectacular. So in conclusion, as mentioned in the beginning of the video, this lens is just spectacular. And for the $2,000 roughly asking price, I cannot really think about anything they would do better. I'm absolutely recommending this lens for every Nikon user that is willing to experience some wildlife photography and doesn't want to spend 17,000 euros or dollars on the 600mm f4, for example. This one gets you spectacular pictures, very good autofocus at a reasonable price and in a reasonable dimensions and weight. Now, of course, wildlife lenses are still big, heavy, and expensive in general, but really, this is a good one. Also, if you're on the fence on choosing a system for wildlife, let's just say you are getting your first mirrorless camera and you know that the one thing that you want to do the most is wildlife photography because that's what excites you. Well, I would definitely recommend you to look into the Nikon system because not only you get a decently priced package with super high quality results like the Z6III and this 180-600, which again together they cost $5,000. So we're not talking cheap, but there's nothing cheap when it comes to wildlife photography in general. But also Nikon has invested a lot of R&D into building what is probably the best or the most complete lenses lineup for wildlife photography. You get plenty of primes, plenty of lenses that would allow you to grow into the system once you realize that this is exactly what you want from your photography. And so, well done, Nikon. You really deserve my compliments because you come a long way. You were like the brother that was falling apart, but now is a complete different story. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel. That's it for today, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!